So 1 mana 2/1 selfless hero, the death rattle is give a friendly minion divine shield. So as we said before, just a minute ago, divine shield seems to be becoming a thing. And in that kind of aggro 1 health minion divine shield deck, this card is definitely going to see an include. Not only because it has 1 health, which makes it able to combine with the Steward of Darkshire, it also gives another minion divine shield when it dies, enabling it to be comboed with the Rallying Blade. So I think that people are going to play around with this kind of a deck, but I'm not very hopeful about it. I think that 1 health is just not good enough, even with the divine shield being able to absorb a blow. And as I've said before, simply comboing all these together is way too hard. Maybe we would see like the Steward of Darkshire seeing play in a deck along with Selfless Hero, but maybe the Rallying Blade isn't good enough to get a spot. I don't know yet. We haven't seen the deck. We need to experiment, and science will be performed. But I don't think it's a bad card, and definitely in that deck it's going to be included. Outside of an aggro kind of Divine Shield flood deck, though, I don't think that this card will see play. It would probably definitely see play in Arena, though, simply due to the fact that giving a random 2-drop that you play the next turn Divine Shield, especially if it has stealth, is like the Gilblin Stalker, is insane. So that's a really good card for Arena. A Light in the Darkness, 2 mana, discover a minion and give it +1/+1. This is essentially 2 mana, draw a card and give it +1/+1. Now, the minion you draw could vary. I mean, it could be a really, really bad minion like a Wisp or something like that, and then you've got a 0 mana 2/2, which is not terrible, but you essentially just played a 2 mana 2/2, which is not good. But on average, I think that this card has a lot of potential. I think that the value potential is definitely there, especially when you consider the fact that a lot of minions are often about 1 attack or 1 health away from being really, really good for their cost. And so for 2 mana, you get that. You get that draw, you get that minion, plus you get to kind of push it into a range that makes it really, really good for its mana cost. So I think that this card's definitely going to see some play in Constructed and in Arena. It's pretty damn good. Divine Strength, 1 mana, so give a minion +1/+2. Now, notably, health is good, but it's not as good in Paladins since they can't really heal their minions with their hero power like Priest can. Because of that, I think that the type of deck that wants to run this is an early game deck, and I think that that kind of deck is going to run Blessing of Might, the +3 attack, before it would ever run a card like this. I don't think that the health is important enough, and I don't think that a control deck, while it wants to get that +2 health maybe, is going to run a card like this over something else. So because of that, it's not that great. In Arena also, I think it's not that great. Okay, so on to Priest. So the first card we're looking at is the 2 mana Embrace the Shadow. It kind of seems that where Priest is going in this expansion is that Priest is going towards using healing as damage. So they're kind of going Shadow Priesty, which is really cool, and I really like the effect. This has a lot of synergy, of course, with a lot of cards in Priest, including Flash Heal, Justicar, Hero Power, things like that. I think, however, that the type of deck that uses this card is not the same type of deck that plays the card Shadow Form. I think that this is the type of deck that seeks to use healing as damage. Now, before, that used to be done by comboing Akanai Soul Priest with, for example, Zombie Chow. But Zombie Chow is not available in Standard anymore. But we have seen things that have come out, like, for example, the Corrupted Heal Bot, which restores 8 health to your enemy on death. So if you can somehow play like the Corrupted Healbot, which is a decent card if its Death Rattle doesn't hurt you, doesn't benefit the enemy, I should say, your opponent. It's actually not bad, and the 8 health as damage is pretty cool. But you can't reliably combo it away, so if you could somehow clear the board, which is also really hard to do because of the fact that Light Bomb doesn't exist in Standard anymore, that would actually be a pretty sick combo. But I think that this card would still see some kind of play in those kinds of healing as damage decks because it's simply another way, it's another Akanai effect. And those effects are really powerful in those kinds of Control Priest decks that seek to use healing to control the board. Like, you want to play your Akanai Soul Priest, and then you want to use your 4 damage hero power to control the board. And this is another way to do that. But it also gives a chance for burst potential at the end of the game, with this card plus double Flash Heal for a 4 mana essentially killing blow. to your opponent. And there's of course other healing effects as well. This can be comboed with Circle of Healing. So it also makes it easier to use your Auchenai Soul Priest for the body rather than for the effect. Before, you always wanted to hold on to your Auchenai Soul Priest because that was the only healing to damage effect that you had. So even though at some point where you'd want to play it for tempo, you felt that you couldn't because you simply had to hold it, and then you end up losing the game because you never draw your Circle of Healing or something like that. But now you can use that Auchenai to fight for the board and use your 2 damage or 4 damage hero power to help control the board, and then if it dies, well, you've still got Embrace the Shadow to end the game. So I think that this card is pretty good in those kinds of decks. In Arena, it's completely going to be dependent on how many healing cards you've drafted and simply what kind of deck that you have. In general, I think that this card is pretty bad in Arena. Alright, so the 5 mana Twilight Dark Mender, so notably not the kind of card that you want to play with the last card we looked at, Embrace the Shadow, since if your Cthun has at least 10 attack, restore 10 health to your hero. This is probably the Cthun synergy card that I'm least excited about, simply due to the fact that, yeah, restoring 10 health looks good on paper, and it's sometimes okay against aggro decks, but remember that the Priest hero power already restores health anyway. And the kind of control deck that runs Cthun in Priest is probably going to also run Justicar, so for 2 mana you're restoring 4 health, and that's usually probably enough when you consider all the control cards that you have already in Priest, things like Auchenai Circle, things like Entomb, Shadowward Death, Shadowward Pain. All of those cards are still around. And so because of that, I think that this card is not really the best thing in the world. Notably, it's out of range of BGH, which makes it a little bit better as a 6 attack body you can throw on the board to restore health. So will it make it into the Cthun deck? Yeah, probably, but it's not a card that I'm really excited about. But, you know, it's reasonable. It's a reasonable card, and it'll probably definitely make it into those kinds of decks. Okay, so this is another one of those cards where we can combo it with the card that we just looked at before, Embrace the Shadow, where you play this card for 2 mana and your healing effects become damaging, and then you play this card for 5 mana, so it's a 7 mana combo, and you restore 5 health to anything that you want. You can choose an enemy minion, you can choose the enemy's face, so something like that card plus this card for 7 mana, Flash Heal, that's 15 damage. Right, that's a lot of damage to your opponent's face. And this card specifically, together with Embrace the Shadow and Auchenai Soul Priest, is why I think that kind of priest deck, that kind of healing as damage deck, is going to be so powerful in this expansion. The ability to deal a lot of burst damage to close out the game is going to be really cool. So I'm really excited for that. In Arena, you know, it's a 5 mana 4/5, not the greatest stats in the world. Notably, Chillwind Yeti's a 4 mana 4/5, but the ability to restore 5 health, possibly to one of your other 4-drops, is really good. So I think that it will see some play, for sure, in Arena. Power word Tentacle. So notably, every Japanese man has just been really excited by this. So looking at this card's beautiful artwork, dat face. Power word Tentacles give a minion +2, +6. So this is the new Villain's Chosen, essentially. Villain's Chosen is being rotated out in Standard. +6 health is crazy, right? And +2 attack is pretty crazy. Now, notably, you can't play this until the mid-game, so it's a little bit less good than Villain's Chosen, which could essentially blow out the early game. And then you would use your hero power to continue restoring the health on that minion, and you would blow out the middle game just with that really overpowered minion. Sometimes, right? This is not like that, but the fact that it gives you +6 health is really good, so I definitely think that this card is going to see play in mid-rangey, kind of maybe that. I have a feeling that healing as damage deck is going to be more mid-rangey, and I think that this card would also see play in control decks simply due to the fact that +6 health on some kind of a big minion is really, really significant, but only if that deck is minion based. So probably we'll see play in Dragon Priest, for example, which is a little bit kind of a mid-rangey control deck. So this kind of ability to give your already high health dragon minions another +6 health is really good. So I think that this card will definitely see play in Arena and in Constructed. So here's the 4 mana Hooded Acolyte. So whenever a character is healed, you give your Cthun +1/+1 wherever it happens to be. This card is pretty good. Of course, Priest has a lot of heals, and as a 4-mana 3/6, the stat line is really good. So you play this card with your Wild Pyromancer, so that's already 6 mana, and then you do something insane like Circle Circle. The circle will likely heal some minions, which will buff your Cthulhu by plus a lot, and then your Pyro will damage all the minions on the board, and then the circle will heal them all again, and you've given your Cthulhu something insane like +10/+10 or something like that, so bringing it up to like a 16 damage Cthulhu. Definitely going to see play in the Cthulhu decks. Really exciting card, really awesome. Here's the new Rogue Cthulhu synergy card. So notably 9 mana, Battlecry, destroy a minion and add its attack and health to Cthulhu. So obviously a 9 mana 4/4 is not good, but this effect is so powerful that it's insane, right? Not only can you destroy a minion, you also add its attack and health to Cthulhu. So it's essentially like if you play this against like a 7 health minion, let's say, or a 7 attack and health minion, you play this against a 7/7, you add its attack and health to Cthulhu. So you're essentially adding 14 worth of stats to your Cthulhu, which is insane, right? So now your Cthulhu is like a 20/20. You play your Cthulhu on turn 10, and you just simply blow out the game, right? And that's crazy. And, well, by the way, so let's look at another card. So Shadowcaster, 5 mana, 4/4, Battlecry. Choose a friendly minion, add a 1/1 copy to your hand that costs 1. If this card survives one turn, just one turn, right? On turn 10, you play the Shadowcaster, you get a 1/1 copy of this card that costs 1. You use it to destroy another minion, right? And if you get to do that for 6 mana, that's crazy. And then on like turn 11, if you have Cthulhu in your hand, you're dealing like 1,000,000 damage to your opponent's face. Like that's the dream combo, right? Like that's not really realistically going to happen. But still, this card is really awesome. And I'm really excited to see this being used with some cards that have really powerful and awesome effects. Even just a card like, for example, SI7 Agent that has a Battlecry to deal 2 damage when comboed. Like you'd be happy to play a low cost card and then play a 1/1 copy of SI7 that deals more damage to your opponent's minions or face. So that's pretty good. I mean, this card is really awesome. It's definitely going to see play in a lot of the new Rogue decks. Journey Below, discover a Death Rattle card. I won't talk about this one too much. I'm trying to go a little bit faster here, but so discover a Death Rattle card is not as good in standard, or sorry, is maybe almost a little bit better in standard due to the fact that a lot of the kind of I want to say shitty Death Rattle effects like Haunted Creeper have been taken out, but maybe it's not, because we've seen a lot of a lot of new shitty effects come in, like that 4 mana Hunter card we talked about earlier that summons 2 1/1s. So you can kind of get some really, really good cards like Sylvanas. You can kind of get some really, really bad cards like that one. Overall, the effect for 1 mana especially is really good overall. We've seen the new Rogue card as well, the Undercity Huckster and things like that essentially mini burgles your opponent. Yeah, so you're going to be really happy to discover any of those cards, even if you're just playing a 2-drop the next turn. So yeah, probably an auto include in a lot of Rogue decks simply due to the potential of this card. Southsea Squid Face, Death Rattle, give your weapon +2 attack. So it's a 4 mana 4/4 pirate. So definitely going to see play in a lot of those Rogue pirate decks that'll be experimented with once more, just like they are every expansion. The Death Rattle effect is significant. It gives your weapon +2 attack. That's pretty good. 4 mana 4/4 is reasonable. Notably, Ship's Cannon, one of the cards that made pirate decks so insane, is being rotated out of standard, unfortunately. The card is kind of meh. It'll be experimented with, but it's not good enough to be included by itself, I think, even with the Death Rattle effect. Notably, Goblin Auto Barber is being rotated out, but that card wasn't seeing play anyway, so meh overall. Shadow Strike, deal 5 damage to an undamaged character. So essentially 3 mana. It's essentially a 3 mana upgraded backstab. It can be comboed with things as well. At 3 mana, it's not overly expensive. This is essentially a cheaper removal option that a lot of rogue decks that were kind of hesitant to include in Assassinate simply due to the cost of it will probably include Shadow Strike now, simply due to the fact that it's really good for its cost. And so because of that, I think that this card is really good, and it's definitely going to see play in some rogue decks. In Arena as well, of course. 1 mana 1/2 Bladed Cultist. It's a combo that gains +1/+1, so it becomes essentially a 1 mana 2/3. Unfortunately, you can't really play this on one. Obviously, if you have 2 of these in your deck, the dream situation is that you have the coin, and you can coin Bladed Cultist, Bladed Cultist. You have 2 2/3s on the board, and you just essentially win the game from there. That's not very likely to happen, but it will happen, and it's probably going to make Trollden when it does and whatnot. But overall, because of the fact that you can't really combo on one without just burning your coin for nothing, and you don't want to burn your coin for a 1 mana 2/3, it's just not good enough. You'd much rather play your 2 mana minion. But, I mean, it's a reasonably good card simply because it can be played on 3. So you can play it with a 2-drop on 3. You can get the combo effect to go off, and the combo effect is not bad. A 2/3 is pretty good. In the late game, though, you still really don't want to top deck this card. It's pretty bad to top deck this card in the late game, much like Zombie Chow was. But, it might see some play in some faster rogue decks, in my opinion. Okay, so here is the new shaman cards for this particular release cycle. So Eternal Sentinel, Battlecry, unlock your overloaded mana crystals. So in my opinion, this card is strictly better than Lava Shock due to the fact that you get a 3/2 body on the board, the potential to do 3 damage instead of 2 damage. Now, you can't necessarily choose where that damage goes, but this card is still really, really good. And I think you're probably going to play this as a minion over playing something like Lava Shock, which made you sad to play in Overload decks before because it was 2 mana deal 2 and it was meh. But this puts a minion on the board, which if it survives, gives you the potential to do even more crazy things with it. So it's pretty good. Evolve, transform your minions into random minions that cost 1 more. While this card is good overall, I'm not entirely sure it's going to see play. I think it will, simply because on average, transforming your minions into random ones that cost 1 more is pretty good. Now, you can get some bad things, like you can get a 4 mana 1/1, a Faceless Shambler, but at least it has taunt. I guess that's something if you're upgrading a 3 mana minion, right? But, so, there's some bad things like that can happen. But on average, minions that cost more are statted better. So on average, this card's going to be really good to play in some kind of a zoo shaman or a flood shaman, any kind of mid-range shaman. So I think the new mid-range shaman is going to include this card. I'm revising my statement. I think that the mid-range shaman is going to include this card because of the fact that on average it's pretty good to upgrade. But any deck that has where I'm struggling with this card is any deck that has a lot of overload cards in it. In a lot of cases, overload cards are better than cards that cost 1 mana more, but they have that overload effect that kind of balances it out, right? So if you play like a Totem Golem, which is a 2 mana 3/4, which is better than most 3-drops, or a lot of like neutral classic 3-drops. This could potentially actually downgrade your minion stats. However, the ability to kind of trade your minions off partially, like partially damage your golem or your other minions and then play Evolve after trading into the board is pretty good. So, I don't know. I think that it's a pretty good card overall. It might see a spot, it might not. It's all going to come down to what works in practice in the new meta. So, yeah, it's going to need to be experimented with. But it's a good card. It's reasonable. It's really cool. Flame Wreathed Faceless, a 4 mana 7/7 with Overload 2. So it's essentially like a 6 mana 7/7. Yeah, I think we can all go home now. I think the mid-range shaman has just completely dominated the meta. Especially with things like the BGH nerf, and given the fact that a lot of other hard removal options don't come in until like 6 mana, Yeah, this card is pretty insane. Yeah, it's pretty broken. You're gonna pick this all day in those new mid-range shaman decks. You're gonna pick it all day in arena. You might even pick this in face shaman. It's just that good. It's like dropping Fel Reaver. It's essentially like dropping Fel Reaver without the downside. I would be much like I said about the mage card before. I would be extremely surprised if this card doesn't see a nerf pretty soon after the release of the expansion. So 2 mana Stormcrack, deal 4 damage to a minion and overload 1. So notably, Crackle is being rotated out, but I think that the ability to do 4 damage to a minion is useful only in control decks, so it would probably be experimented with in Control Shaman. It's probably not going to make a spot in the mid-range Shaman deck. I can't seem to find a way to fit it in there. But it's a reasonable card, right? Essentially 3 mana deal 4, but it's not exciting, and it's only damage to a minion. It's not damage that can be done to face, which makes it not exciting for face Shaman either. Overall, meh. Yeah, probably the weakest card in the Shaman set, in my opinion. Primal Fusion, give a minion +1/+1 for each of your totems. Never mind, this one is the weakest one, in my opinion. Now, these are both probably equal. Like, I was going back and forth before I recorded this, trying to figure out which one was weaker. Primal Fusion is weaker simply because you can't guarantee having a lot of totems on the board. In order to get, due to the fact that this is using up a card slot and it's costing 1 mana, you probably want to have like 3 totems on the board for +3/+3 effect before you really want to include this in your deck for 1 mana. Because essentially you want to do 1 mana deal 3, and you can't really do that reliably. So I think that this card is pretty bad, much like Ancestral Healing or whatever the hell that other card is called that's really bad. Okay, so this is a 2 mana 3/2. It's a Warlock card, Darkshire Librarian. So to Battlecry, you discard a random card, Death Rattle, draw a card. So you're looking to discard something like Fist of Jaraxxus that has a beneficial effect. It seems like they're kind of still trying to toy with this whole discard Warlock thing, but it's not good. Discarding a random card is on average not good. Again, if you could choose the card that you could discard decks would be really good. You could discard your Fist of Jaraxxus and deal 4 damage at your choice, but you can't reliably do that, so this card is pretty bad. Yep. Forbidden Ritual. So here's the Warlock Forbidden card. So you're going to spend all your mana and summon that many 1/1 tentacles. So it might see a spot in Zoo. Overall, meh to kind of meh. If they had charge, that'd be pretty cool. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So yeah, the tentacles are not, they don't have any kind of synergy. They're not really anything special. You can summon like up to 7 tentacles, but meh, they're all 1/1s. But it's pretty good for a Zoo deck. I'm not sure if it'll see play simply due to the fact that it takes up a card slot. Zoo is losing a lot of tools though in this expansion, so as a kind of a replacement, quote unquote, to something like Implosion, we're also losing Mal'Ganis, things like that, Haunted Creeper. It might see a spot in the deck, but outside of Zoo, nah, not gonna play it. Usher of Souls is the 5 mana 5/6, so this is the Warlock synergy card for Cthun. So whenever a friendly minion dies, give your Cthun +1/+1. Now this card is really interesting, not because of its stat line, but because of what it means for the implications of what the Warlock Cthun deck is really going to be. And what it ends up being is the Warlock Cthun deck ends up being more of a Zoo deck. Now, notably, Demon Zoo is more of a mid-range deck than it is an aggro deck. It's a light, what I like to call a light control deck. You control the board in the early game, and you generally try to end in the mid game, and you try to hit the face more towards the late mid game and late game to kill off your opponent. And you have really powerful burst finishers like Doom Guards and Power Overwhelmings and Mal'Ganis buffs and things like that. We're unfortunately losing Mal'Ganis, but it seems like we're going to, and we're losing Voidcaller, by the way, but it seems that we're going to be able to kind of replace that with some of these great Cthulhu cards. One of the things that really sucks about Zoo going forward is you really don't even want to play Doomguard anymore because of the fact, well, maybe you still play 1 copy of it, but you definitely don't want to run double anymore because of the fact that the downside is just so prevalent, and you can't even in a zoo deck, you can't often consistently dump your hand to the point where you can always just play Doomguard without having any kind of negative impact. Unfortunately, it's always going to have some kind of a negative impact in most cases. So, but I think it's interesting simply due to the fact that because of how this card buffs Cthulhu, I think that the Cthulhu deck is going to be more of a zoo deck, which is really interesting. So I think that that's really cool, and I'm interested to try out Cthulhu now in my favorite class, which is Warlock. Dark Shire Councilman, 3 mana, 1/5, kind of like Hobgoblin, maybe, kind of, sort of. After you summon a minion, gain +1 attack. Will this make it into the zoo deck? Maybe. Stay tuned and find out. Will it make it into the zoo Cthulhu deck? Maybe. Stay tuned and find out. I'm definitely, given the fact that this card is so good for buffing Cthulhu and the stat line is just reasonable, it's a 5 mana, 5/6, which is not bad. Eventually, I think we're going to run out of slots. We have to include other Cthulhu synergy cards in our zoo deck. Plus, we have to include Cthulhu itself. And so you can say Cthulhu replaces Mal'Ganis. Other buff cards replace things like Haunted Creepers, and they replace Implosions and things like that. But then can you fit in the Darkshire Councilman? I don't think so. Now, in a not Cthulhu deck, if a not Cthulhu zoo deck ends up being better, does Darkshire Councilman have a place? Yeah, I think so, because gaining +1 attack for each minion that you play is pretty good. It's pretty vulnerable to silence, unfortunately, but a lot of good cards are. So notably, this doesn't give your other minions +1 attack. This card is the one that gets the attack for summoning minions, so you want to play this in the mid to late game to kind of get something like a 6/5 or a 5/5 or something like that. At a minimum, you want to try to buff this card 3 times. You want to try to get this up to like a 3 mana 4/5, which is really, really good for its cost. Even a 3 mana 3/5 is okay, so getting 2 buffs is reasonable, but 3 buffs is where you really want to be at to be kind of in a winning position. But yeah, this card is average. If it has a place or not is simply going to come down to how many cards we want to put in our decks, and how many cards are better than this card, I think. And given the fact that this is so vulnerable to silence, it's not a great card. So the new Warlock legendary is Malkorok. It's a Battlecry, equip a random weapon. Now that weapon could be from any class, so you could get something like a True Silver Champion, and you've got a 6/5 on the board and a True Silver that you can use right away, and that's pretty cool. Now, you could also potentially get something terrible. Like, for example, you could get a Cursed Blade, and then your opponent simply drops a Pyroblast on your face for 20 damage next turn and kills you off. So that's pretty shitty, but you know, that's variance, right? That's going to happen. On average, this card is pretty good. It's kind of a really good replacement to Dr. Boom and some of the control warrior decks. Warriors like to run a lot of weapons, especially in control decks, so I think that this being essentially another weapon that they can get, especially with the Deathspite being rotated out. It's a pretty reasonable card. It's a pretty sweet card. I think it's going to be played along with things like Gorehowl and whatnot, so yeah, it's pretty good. Bloodhoof Brave, 4 mana 2/6 taunt with enrage +3 attack. This is pretty good for control decks. Essentially, this is the replacement that I was looking for in Warrior to Sludge Belcher, because the 2 attack is not that significant, but the fact that it can take like a 3/2 damage hit and then it buffs itself up to a 5/6 taunt is pretty cool. Now, is that 5 attack likely to hit something big? Not really. Most likely your opponent's going to run the bigger minion into it first because it's going to take less damage, and then they'll kill it off with the low health minion. So, but overall, I mean, this is probably going to force awkward trading, and it's going to force at least probably 2 hits on average to kill it off at 4 mana. It's strictly better Senjin Shieldmaster in my opinion, so I think it's going to definitely make it into at least 1 copy, maybe 2 copies will make it into the Control Warrior decks. It's a really good card. In Arena, it's a really good card too. 3 mana 3/4 Blood Cell Cultist. Battlecry, if you control a pirate, give your weapon +1/+1. Obviously only good in pirate decks. I'm not going to talk too much about that because we don't know how good necessarily they are yet. My inclination, especially with the rotating out of ship's cannon, it's not good, so meh. Deathwing Dragonlord. This card is deceptively good in that it's a 10 mana 12/12 and puts all dragons from your hand into the battlefield, but note that you have to play this on 10 mana, and by then you've probably already dumped a lot of your hand anyway, and you've probably already played a lot of your dragons anyway. It might be good in something like a Warlock Dragon deck that can tap to draw more cards, but meh. Overall, it's just very, very meh. Meh, 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 meh. The chances that you're going to pull out like Ysera and Malygos are so slim that you can't rely on Deathwing Dragonlord to kind of be a really good card. I could be wrong. I mean, this is definitely going to see experimentation and more controlling dragon decks, but in like Dragon Priest or things like even like Malygos Warlock, nah, you're not going to really play this card. It's not that good, especially due to the fact that a lot of the benefit of dragons comes from their battle cries that they get, the battle cry effects, and you're foregoing all of those battle cry effects when you dump them onto the battlefield. The same reason that Varian Rin was never such a good card in the Grand Tournament. So overall, you know, it's pretty cool card. I like the Neltharion artwork on it, but I don't think it's going to see a lot of play. Another new neutral legendary, Twin Emperor Veclor. So it's a 7 mana 4/6 taunt battlecry. If your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack, you summon another Emperor. So you're essentially getting an 8/12 worth of stats if your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack, which it very likely will around this time. So I think that this card is really, really good. So we were looking for those replacements to Sludge Belcher, and we looked at the 9 mana card last time and said that even though it has hexproof, it's probably too slow. This one is not necessarily too slow at 7 mana, and due to the fact that your Cthulhu is almost always going to have 10 attack, and the fact that I think all Control Warrior decks are going to be running Cthulhu in this expansion, due to how amazing some of the Cthulhu synergy cards are with Warrior, especially the new Shield Maiden. I can't remember exactly what the name of it was. Ancient Shield Bearer, I think. That gives you plus 10 armor. A card like this that can also stall out the game even more is really good. So yeah, this card is really nice, and I'm really, really happy to see a card like this be printed. Okay, so the next card is the 5 mana 3/6. It's called the Crazed Worshipper, and it's another taunt minion, which is really cool. Whenever this minion takes damage, give your Cthulhu +1/+1 wherever it is. So the problem I'm having is a lot of the Cthulhu cards are really, 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 really good. Like we just saw this Twin Emperor Veclor, where if your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack already, you summon another 4/6 taunt, which is really, really good also. This one buffs your Cthulhu when you take damage, and it's a taunt, so you could play something like the Crazed Worshipper into Veclor for even more taunt amazingness. But do I think that all of these cards are going to be able to make it into a Cthulhu deck reliably? No, unfortunately. So at some point we have to kind of play around and decide which cards are the best. This one's pretty good as far as I'm concerned, but is it better than some of the other Cthulhu cards we've seen? Maybe, maybe not. So we're going to have to kind of wait and see on that. But yeah, I mean, as the card exists right now, it's a 3/6, which is better than Sludge Belcher, except it doesn't give you that slime, but it gives your Cthulhu +1/+1, enabling further combos with the synergy cards or with things like Veclor, which is a neutral synergy card. Yeah, probably going to see play. Is it good enough, better than some of the other ones we've seen? Maybe. We have to kind of wait and see in practice which ones kind of become the best. Which ones edge out the competition, but it's going to be like really, really close. A lot of the Cthulhu cards are really good. 4 mana Twilight Summoner. So this is a 1/1 with a Death Rattle to summon a 5/5 Faceless Destroyer. So it's kind of like a 4 mana 6/6, but it's a little bit slow to get going. Is this card gonna see play? Maybe. It's kind of, so here's how you think of it. You think of it as the new Nerubian Egg. Before, when I was talking about Zoo, I actually forgot to mention that Nerubian Egg is also being rotated out. It's a little bit more expensive, but you can actually kill it off yourself without buffing with something like Argus. So it's possible that a card like this is going to see a lot of play simply in Zoo decks. And yeah, it's a reasonable card. It's pretty good. Yeah. 8 mana Doom Caller. So Battlecry to give your Cthulhu +2/+2 wherever it is. And if it's dead, you shuffle it into your deck. I don't want to say that this card is an auto-include in Cthulhu decks, but it might be a one-of auto-include in most Cthulhu decks. Not only are you giving your Cthulhu +2/+2, you're also, if you've already played your Cthulhu and you are going into kind of an even more late game and you need a little bit more burst, well, Cthulhu's coming back. It's going back into your deck when you play the Doomcaller, and your Cthulhu buffs, by the way, so this is just a theory, I guess it hasn't been confirmed for sure yet, but Cthulhu buffs are actually tied to the player and not the Cthulhu card itself. Therefore, when you put Cthulhu back into your deck, it maintains all of the buffs that you've already put on it, plus the +2/+2 that Doomcaller is giving it. So if your Cthulhu was a 12/12 when it died, you're putting a 14/14 Cthulhu back into your deck, which is really good. So I think that as a one-of, this card's probably going to be included in a lot of Cthulhu decks. Corrupted Seer, 6 mana, so it's really expensive for its stats. It's a 2/3 with a Battlecry that deals 2 damage to all non-Murloc minions. Unfortunately, I feel that this card, even in a Murloc deck, is a little bit too slow to get going. You're normally looking to kind of wrap up the game. I mean, Murloc decks are aggro decks, so you're mostly looking to wrap up the game around that point. So I think that 6 mana deal 2 to the board is meh. Would it be used in decks that aren't those kinds of decks as kind of like a replacement for the 4 mana mage combo before, where you would play Explosive Sheep and ping it off and deal 2 damage to the whole board? Maybe. So it might see, but I think at 6 mana it's a little bit too overcosted for that purpose, so it probably isn't going to see a lot of play. Now notably, it is a Battlecry, and it does put a 2/3 back on the board. So is that 2/3 worth kind of 2 mana, I guess, is the question that you have to ask yourself, or is it just simply too late in the game? In my personal opinion, I think it's just too late in the game to really have that much of an impact with that 2 damage. So I don't think it's going to see a lot of play. So Blackwater Pirate is another pirate, and all of your weapons will cost 2 less. Now notably, we've seen like the whole warrior pirate thing kind of starting to get going, but like especially with the 1 mana card that equips the Rusty Hook, the 1/3 or 1/4 weapon, whatever it was, is not a weapon that you have to play. Therefore, a card like the Blackwater Pirate is not that great. It's definitely not going to be included in regular decks. It's going to be included in pirate decks for pirate synergy specifically. Unfortunately, like especially with, for example, Deathspite being rotated out, having your weapons cost 2 less is not necessarily something that we need to play a card for, and the stats are pretty bad on this card anyway, so meh, it's probably not going to see a lot of play. 4 mana 1/4, so this is interesting card. Especially in a deck like Reno Jackson that doesn't want to run 2 copies of Twilight Drake, because that would, of course, conflict with Reno's ability. This one is another kind of sort of Twilight Drake, where Battlecry to gain +1 attack for each other card in your hand. So if the opponent's side of the board is empty, or you can clear it off in some way, this card's pretty damn good. Like, even if you can just get this buffed by like 4 and you have a 4 mana 5/4, like that's pretty reasonable, and especially where it has the dragon tag on it. So if you hold it in your hand for a while, like in Warlock dragon decks would typically do, that's not nothing. But I think that really this card would want to be seeing play in kind of like a Reno Jackson deck, and the fact that it has 4 health is not that great. So overall, as much as I kind of want to be excited for this card simply due to how powerful the effect seems and how it's kind of like a Twilight Drake 2.0 or something like that, in the end, it probably isn't even going to see play even in like a Reno Jackson deck, due to the fact that it's not gaining the health. The health was always the thing that was most important about Twilight Drake, not necessarily the attack. Yes, it has an opportunity to become a ginormous minion that just wins you the game sometimes, but not enough of the time where it's probably going to see play. 3 mana. Disciple of Cthun is a 2/1 that deals 2 damage and gives your Cthun +2/+2. So again, I have the same problem with this card that I have with other Cthun cards. It's really good, and the Cthun buff is awesome, but we don't have space for all of those cards in our deck. So is it better than some of the other Cthulhu cards we've seen? Maybe it is. We also don't know how relevant dealing 2 damage at this point in the game really is, because simply due to the fact that we don't know how the meta is going to shape up yet. So I think that a lot of testing needs to be done, but I mean, it's a reasonable card. It's a good card. It's a damn good card. 10/10 Faceless Behemoth. Yeah, this isn't going to see play. It's kind of the trash card of the expansion, it seems, but meh. Overall, meh. You're not going to pull this off of any random effects or anything like that, except like Unstable Portal, which will be in Wild. So have fun with that in Wild, guys. 8 mana, 6/10 Eldritch Horror. I mean, the 10 health is you know, reasonable, but I think in the fact that it can't be BGH, you know, that's something, but still just a vanilla card, probably not going to see play. So this is a 4 mana 2/2 evolved kobold, which is kind of looking at the kobold 2 mana kobold card, the corrupt version of that. So it gives you spell damage +2 for 4 mana and a 2/2 body. Meh, no, overall meh. Okay, so this is the corrupt version of the Amani Berserker, the 2 mana 2/3 Enrage. This one's a 4 mana 3/5 Enrage that puts it up to a 4 mana 5/5. Of course, it's not going to see play. It's not even as good as the Berserker before, where you could just ping it and you would get like a 5/3 on the board. So this card is really bad, even as a corrupt version. Meh, just really meh. They should have at least done +3 attack, I think, but no, it's not good. 2 mana 4/1 Duskboar. I don't know if this is supposed to be corrupt Huffer or what, but it definitely doesn't have charge. It does have a beast tag. It does cost 2 mana, but it also dies to 2 mana like ping, so meh. 2 mana 1/4 Taunt, the Twilight Geomancer. It gives your Cthulhu taunt wherever it is. Okay, so this is the first time where I've actually said that a Cthulhu card is worthless. Because let's face it, if Cthulhu comes out onto the field and it doesn't get BGH'd or otherwise removed, it has taunt. It just has taunt. You don't need to give it taunt. Your opponent can't ignore a threat that's that huge, especially after it just essentially cleaned their board and probably did a bunch of damage to their face. So giving your Cthulhu taunt is horrible. This card is horrible. It won't see play. Bilefin Tidehunter, 2 mana 2/1 Battlecry, summon a 1/1 ooze with taunt. Now this is interesting for Murloc decks because a lot of the Murloc synergy cards have the problem that they can just be killed off really easily. So if you can hide your war leader behind a 1/1 ooze with taunt, that's pretty good. It enables further combos to take place on subsequent turns, and so I think that this card would definitely see play in a Murloc deck. Do I think Murloc decks are competitive? No, but they're fun, and that's all that matters. 1 mana 1/1 Zealous Initiate, so it has a death rattle effect to give a random friendly minion +1/+1. I think it'll see play in Arena. Outside of Arena, it's just not good enough. It's pretty good if you can combo it with a 2-drop and kill it off, much like the other card that I was talking about before. Alright guys, whew, so we made it, we did it. But anyway, so thank you for watching my review. So this is officially the end of our Whispers of the Old Gods review. Thank you all for watching. Thank you so much. You don't know how much it means to me that you guys supported me. This is the first time I've ever done card reviews before on YouTube, so it's been kind of a really interesting experience for me, not just from learning how to do the reviews, but also learning how to do things like edit the videos and things like that. It's been a really good experience for me as a broadcaster to be able to do this, so thank you guys so much for supporting me. I hope you guys enjoy Whispers of the Old Gods when it releases. I'm going to be playing a lot. I'm sure you guys are going to be playing a lot as well. Let's get out there with those Cthulhu decks and see what we can do. Yeah. All right. Take care, guys. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.